Jingle bells coming through the rye. I wish you a Merry Christmas, even as you and I.
It took the very words out of my mouth.
Well, hello, and a very warm welcome to this very special episode of the Laurel and Hardy blogcast. I'm Patrick Vasey, the author of the Laurel and Hardy blog, and this is episode 9, and it's the one that many of you have been waiting and even asking for. We finally made it through Stan and Babe's pre-team phase, and so today's film and focus is, of course, the second 100 years, their first as an official team. So that's pretty special, but that's not the main reason today's show is so special. Joining us today to discuss the second 100 years and much, much more besides is the man who has enriched our understanding of the comedy world of Laurel and Hardy beyond measure. The ultimate edition of his book, Laurel and Hardy, The Magic Behind the Movies, is a must-have item for all fans, and also the book that nearly all of our guests so far have chosen to keep with them on their deserted atoll. Today's guest is, of course, the one and only Randy Skretvedt. Now, this is the first part of a two-part interview with Randy, so do look out for episode 10 coming out in a few small weeks for the second half of the interview. Now, before we start, I just wanted to say a few words about the final reason for this being a special episode. I usually like to keep these podcast recordings what they call evergreen, that is to say, sort of unaffected by current events, so that you could listen to this episode in 5 or 10 years' time, and it's just as relevant then as it is now. However, I'm recording this episode just a few days away from Christmas, and as you all know only too well, it has been an absolute stinker of a year this year, to say the least. So I've decided to sprinkle in a little bit of festive Christmas flavour here and there today, just to lighten it up a little bit, and so we can have a little bit of fun. We started this blogcast adventure together back on April the 1st. April Fool's Day seemed quite relevant at the time, and it's just been great to have this opportunity to share this time with you. So I just wanted to say thank you for your friendship, thank you for your support, your feedback, and your positive comments. I've had such a blast making these podcasts, and the feedback that's come back from you guys kind of suggests that you're enjoying them as well, which is wonderful. I hope you enjoyed this Christmas episode. I had a great time putting it together, as always. So, without further ado, let's pop over to California, let's get this episode underway, and we'll meet today's guest. Our guest today is someone who I know many of you, have been very keen and excited to have on the show. He is widely regarded as the foremost expert on Laurel and Hardy in the world. His book, Laurel and Hardy, The Magic Behind the Movies, first published in 1987 and recently revised and greatly expanded into the Ultimate Edition, is perhaps the most complete and in-depth exploration of the career of Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy. It has been described by critics as the book that all cinema books should aspire to be, and rightly so. Among the many hats that he wears, he is an author, entertainment historian, and he produces and hosts his own weekly radio show. So it is with immense pleasure that I am able to say, Randy Skretvedt, welcome to the Laurel and Hardy blogcast.
Thank you, Patrick. Although I have to take slight exception to being billed as the ultimate Laurel and Hardy expert, because I have my little niche, which is the history of the production of the Laurel and Hardy films. But there are other experts who know far more about their particular aspect of Laurel and Hardy than I do. There's A.J. Marriott, who focuses on the stage work. There's Rob Stone, who has written a wonderful book and is just about to bring out his own greatly revised version of his book about the solo films. And of course, Richard Bann is the historian of Hal Roach and his studio. So, everybody has their little specialty, but I thank you for the compliment.
That's fine. I accept your comments, but to me and now to many, Randy, you will always be the ultimate expert on Laurel and Hardy.
All right. Well, I try.
Randy, it's so good to finally have you on the show. I was talking to Glenn Mitchell in a recent episode, and I said to him, as I say to you now, without your writing, I wouldn't be sitting here today. You know, and I'm afraid I'm going to do my fanboy bit here, so apologies.
That's
but
all right.
Without your writing on the boys, there wouldn't be a Laurel and Hardy blog. There would be no blogcast. So I wanted to begin just by saying thank you to you. Thank you from myself personally. Thank you from all the listeners in the Bloghead community. And thank you, of course, from all the Laurel and Hardy fans in the wider fan community around the world. Because of you, the decades of endless dedication for researching and tracking down and interviewing all the cast and crew of the boys' films that you could find, drawing it all together in this astonishing volume, our knowledge of Laurel and Hardy, their lives and their work is so much richer and so much more complete than it ever could have been. So thank you so much. You know, Laurel and Hardy means so much to us fans, and so thank you for giving us that, and thank you also for what you've done for the boys' legacy as well. It's just truly astonishing.
Well, it was all my pleasure, and as they always say, I stand on the shoulders of giants, so I hope I don't fall. Of course, I had the same experience with John McCabe's book, Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy, and the William K. Everson book, The Films of Laurel and Hardy. Those were really the two books when I got into the learning about Laurel and Hardy. So I had that experience, and of course, built from that. So. Everybody follows from everybody else. Maybe in 20 years we'll have somebody who uses my book to do their own even better book. Let's hope.
Let's hope. I can't imagine it, but let's hope. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Brilliant. So what I'd like to do, Randy, today, we're following on the blogcast. We're following the career of Stan and Babe, film by film, chronological order as they were filmed rather than released, because that makes much more sense to me.
Yes.
And we have reached the second 100 years, which is quite a important film.
Yes, indeed. Before
we get into those, though, what I'd like to do, as I do with all my guests, Randy, is just ask you about yourself, really, and just ask you, to start with, about how you discovered Laurel and Hardy, how you got into it, how you became obsessed with it, as we all are. That would be a great start.
Well, I hope you have 3 hours.
I'm sure we do.
Forewarning, you don't get short answers from me.
Perfect.
All right, I'll try and make this as concise as I can. I've loved old movies practically from the time I was conscious. And here in Los Angeles, back in the 1960s, this would be 1962, 63, when I was 3 or 4 years old, we had a channel called KHJ-TV Channel 9, and they seemed to have most of the good old movies. And so when I was that age, 3 and 4 years old, I was religiously watching. On weekends, they had Shirley Temple Theater, Charlie Chan Theater, Universal Monster Movie Theater, and on weekdays they were showing the silent Hal Roach R. Gang shorts in a show called The Mischief Makers, and they showed the later MGM R. Gang shorts on a show called The Pancake Man, which was sponsored by a coffee shop called International House of Pancakes. So I saw all of those. And then another channel, Channel 11, KTTV, began running The Three Stooges every afternoon. It was a show called Billy Barty's Big Top. I don't know if you know Billy Barty, but he was a little person. He's a character actor in many, many movies. And he would come out as a circus ringmaster with a top hat and swallowtail coat and a riding crop, and he would introduce the Three Stooges shorts. Well, I loved those, but my mother was a little concerned about that because, of course, the Three Stooges have the slapping and the eye poking and the head bonking and all that stuff. And she didn't know that that was a good thing for a 4-year-old, 5-year-old boy to be seeing. And so she said to me, why don't you try to find a movie with Laurel and Hardy? They're not as violent as the Three Stooges, but they're very funny. I think you'd like them. Okay. So no bragging, but when I was 3 years old, I could read at a 6th grade level. So I learned to read very quickly. And so I was reading the LA Times TV guide and saw that one magic week, a good old Channel 9, once again, was showing The Golden Age of Comedy, the Robert Youngson compilation of great moments from Mack Sennett and Hal Roach silent movies, which I didn't know. I just saw Golden Age of Comedy, Laurel and Hardy. They used to have a show on Channel 9 called The $1 Million Movie, and they would show the same film every night for a solid week at 7:30. So you got to see it 7 times in that 1 week. So I must have caught it on Sunday because I saw it and was just mesmerized by this. Of course, that film has a heavy concentration on Laurel and Hardy with scenes from Two Tars and Your Darn Tootin'. And, of course, that's all that existed at the time of the Battle of the Century. And so I saw it the first time and I said, I want to see this again. And I watched it every night for that solid week. Well, by that time, I was a total convert and began looking for Laurel and Hardy things in the newspaper. I started a Laurel and Hardy scrapbook, which I still have, starting in summer of 1964. I remember going to a five and dime store and finding a little Larry Harmon Stan Laurel toy bank. It's a plastic bank of Stan sitting on a treasure chest, and Stan Laurel bank. I have to have this. So that was my first Laurel and Hardy knickknack. My bedroom ultimately became overflowing with statuettes and all sorts of Laurel and Hardy goodies. And so not too long after that, Channel 9, once again, started running the Laurel and Hardy talkie shorts at 7 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So I got to see them before I went to school and after I went to school. And because there aren't that many talkie shorts, even when you add in the cut downs from the features, it was not long before I'd seen a pretty significant chunk of their work, And so I was just mesmerized by Laurel and Hardy. I remember being in my first grade classroom one day and drawing pictures from memory from two tars, at age 5. And so by this point, I had just turned 6, and I was in my family's kitchen one day. I was getting ready for school, and I said, gee, I wonder if Laurel or Hardy are still alive, because I knew at that point that these films were 30-odd years old even then. And as soon as I said that, my dad brought in the Los Angeles Times, and on the front page it said, Stan Laurel, 74, film comedian, dies at home. And I thought, that's spooky, because I had just said, I wonder if Laurel or Hardy are still alive, and there was my answer. And, of course, I was very sad to learn that he passed away, but I was mesmerized by all the information in the obituary, which was a fairly long article. So, I learned about the many marriages and all that sort of thing. But, just missed him. If I'd known about that 6 months earlier, I probably would have called him. I don't know how he would have reacted to a 6-year-old boy talking to him, but he may well have had his share calling him, because just last week, in fact, I made it a point to try and find a scan of the phone book with his number in it in Santa Monica, because someone had asked me, Christian Blees in Germany had asked me if I had a photo of that. And I thought, I don't have it. So let's see if it's on there. And the Library of Congress has a website with all sorts of old phone books scanned. And I found the Western Los Angeles one for March of 1961, because that's when Dick Van Dyke said that he found Stan Laurel in the phone book. So I said, okay, well, he'll be in the 61 phone book.
Good.
And sure enough, go through it, and there it is, Laurel Stan, 849 Exbrook 35656. And oddly enough, 2 listings above it is Mrs. Lois Laurel, living at 718 North Bedford Drive in Beverly Hills, the mansion that Stan bought in 1928 that she was still living in, but he wasn't anymore. So that was kind of poignant. But anyway, so I was a forsworn Laurel and Hardy fan from that early age, and continued to buy Laurel and Hardy toys and whatever I could find. And then when I was 9, I was in 4th or 5th grade, and I found a Mechanics Illustrated magazine, which normally I wouldn't have been reading, but I found in the back of it a little display ad, a little portrait from them thar hills, and it said, real Laurel and Hardy movies, only $12.98. And I went, what is this? Because all I had were these little 50-foot cut downs in standard 8mm that you could get at a camera store. That's all I knew of for buying a Laurel and Hardy movie. And that introduced me to a company called Black Hawk Films, which was in Davenport, Iowa, in the Midwest of the United States. And I got a catalog, and lo and behold, they had complete Laurel and Hardy movies in standard 8, Super 8, and 16mm. My family already had a Super 8 projector, so good, I can run these. And I bought a used copy of Big Business for $9.98, which I still have. And I'm glad I still have it, because it is the complete domestic negative. When you see Big Business now, it has domestic and foreign negative all intermixed in a big patchwork. So now the way you can tell is the domestic negative during the scene with the windshield, when they have the close-up shots of Finlayson. In the original domestic American negative, those close-ups are very close, and he's squinting almost directly at you. In the foreign negative, it's a much wider shot, and it's more of a profile. And that's what you tend to see now. So I'm glad I have that print from 1968. so I started buying Laurel and Hardy films for Blackhawk. I gave a Laurel and Hardy show in 4th grade. And silent films with no musical accompaniment, but they still screamed with laughter all the way through. And then when I was 12, I found out about Sons of the Desert, about the Way Out West tent in Los Angeles. Now, you were supposed to be 16 in order to join that club because there was drinking going on. Actually, in those days, it was more like a gentleman's drinking club than a film buff club.
Right.
But anyway, good old Laurie Jones, now Laurie Jones McCaffrey, bless her heart, she bent the rules and let me join. And I went to my first meeting of the Way Out West tent at the American Jewish War Veterans Hall in Los Angeles in August of 1971. And at that meeting, I met Ruth Laurel, Stan's second wife. I met Joe Rock, who had produced silent Stan Laurel comedies. And I met Marvin Hatley, mesmerizing me with his fantastic hot jazz piano and explaining how he wrote the Cuckoo Song. Well, my head was spinning. I mean, forget about whatever films they were showing. This is what was interesting to me. And I was a little upset that at that point they had come out with the first issue of a magazine called Pratfall. And that did have, I think, an interview with Ruth Laurel in it. So they were making strides toward getting these people's stories documented, but it was a little bit here and there. And I was 12 and I knew that these people in their late 70s and 80s were not going to be around forever. You've got to get that story while you can. So it wasn't too much after that I said, I'm going to bring a tape recorder and see if I can get people to just come over and talk with me a little bit, And so I have tapes of mainly Sons of the Desert banquets from 73 and 74, because that's when everybody was getting up to talk and tell their stories anyway. So that's how I got George Marshall. He only ever attended one Sons of the Desert meeting and died not too long after that. But I got the one that he was at. And you can hear part of that on the new DVD and Blu-ray. So anyway, I wanted to get these stories documented because everything they said was fascinating. I said, you are there. They are the people who can tell us how these movies were made. And I think that also coupled with the fact that I just missed meeting and talking with Stan Laurel, it kind of made me think, well, I missed out on him. Let's see if we can get everybody else who's still left, And of course, the Sons of the Desert was a great help because several of the people who worked on the pictures were coming to the Way Out West meetings just as members.
Yeah.
And
did you miss out? You missed out on Billy Gilbert? I think did you as well?
Yeah, he was the Way Out West tent had their first banquet in June of 71 at the Odyssey restaurant in North Hollywood somewhere, I think. And Billy Gilbert was there. I don't know if that was the only meeting that he was at, but he was the guest of honor. At the first meeting that I was at, they ran some film. Unfortunately, the visual portion of the film had been ruined in the lab developing, but the audio was still good because it was on magnetic stripe film. So they ran this black film of audio of what had been at the banquet, and it was Hank Jones, the Grand Sheik of the Way Out West tent, and Billy Gilbert in Los Angeles talking on long distance phone to John McCabe in New York, because they were having their banquet at the very same time. So it was a transcontinental banquet phone call. So mainly it was Hank Jones saying, "Hello, Jack. I have a guest here. Here's Billy Gilbert." And Billy Gilbert doing all of his different sneezes, which was his big routine, And Jack on the other end of the line, because it was long distance and reception wasn't good, saying, "What? What? What?" So, yeah, a typical Laurel and Hardy moment in real life. The film, the visual part didn't work, and the audio was having problems. So, but this is what makes Laurel and Hardy films ring true. You see, is things like this. So anyway, I kept going to Sons of the Desert meetings, and I kept buying films, and I kept collecting Laurel and Hardy knickknacks, and there were a lot of Laurel and Hardy, a lot of merchandising going on in 71, 72. That was the golden era when you could not walk into a gift shop in America and not find some Laurel and Hardy statues or toys or whatever, because Richard Feiner was marketing the real Laurel and Hardy images, and Larry Harmon was marketing the cartoon images. Unfortunately, they both got greedy, and each of them wanted the whole thing, and their mutual lawsuits scared away everybody from using Laurel and Hardy in TV commercials or advertising or products, and so that helped kill the golden goose, you see. Had they each been happy with their own little domain, everything would have been mutually prosperous, you see. But greed is not good, despite what Gordon Gekko says. So anyway, by 1973, I think it was, I found out about another Sons of the Desert tent here in Orange County, and I live in a town called Buena Park. If anybody's ever heard of Knott's Berry Farm, which is a big amusement park that's right near where I live, and it's going to Los Angeles to Sons meetings is a trip of about 35 miles. And of course, the freeways in Los Angeles have never been very hospitable. So anyway, someone closer to me was starting up an Orange County tent, and that was Rob Stone. And Rob was 17 and I was 14. So we've known each other all these years. And so he and I kind of coordinated and did what we could to start building that tent, which he called the Unaccustomed as We Are tent. And then he had to go off to college. He was going to go off to college in Alabama or somewhere. So I helped run it. We had another man named Bob Stoll who had known Stan in the 60s. He came aboard and helped us build that tent. And so off and on, I ran that tent for about 30 years. My friend Brent Walker ran it for some years, but I kind of came back and forth as the Grand Sheik. A lot of our members in our little tent became writers. I wrote my Laurel and Hardy book. Jordan Young wrote several books about character actors. Jeff and Greg Lindbergh wrote the Ultimate Three Stooges book. Brent Walker and David Hayes wrote a book about the Bowery Boys. We all became published authors. Our little tent, brought forth all these people who became writers and film historians. But also the Way Out West tent, as I say, not long after I joined it, not because I joined it, but it just was happening, it became much more film-oriented. And I remember in 1972, they had a banquet which had Babe London was the guest of honor. When you do Our Wife, I'll tell you my Babe London story.
Oh, I love it. Okay. I'll make a note of that.
And so, I was meeting more and more people. And by the time I was able to drive, which was 1975, then, now I could call people up and do proper interviews with them and get them on tape. So most of my interviews I still have all the tapes on reel-to-reel or cassettes, and I'm trying to get them digitized now. But they're from 1975 through 83, most of them. So I was a high school and college student when I did most of those.
And what was the response from sort of fellow Way Out West tent members, and obviously the people you were interviewing, to this sort of young, fresh-faced kid coming up to them, interested in wanting to interview? What was the reaction to that?
Well, I don't know that any of the other members knew I was doing this, but right. I never had any. But the only person I ever had who didn't want to be interviewed was Billy Bletcher. And Billy Bletcher, whom you know as the chief of police in Babes in Toyland, and also the voice of the patrol car in Midnight Patrol. He was a very nice man. He came to one of our early Orange County banquets, the second banquet that we had. He and his wife Arlene, who'd also worked with Babe in Vim comedies, Billy and Arlene Bletcher. And they and their daughter Barbara all came to our second banquet as guests. He gave me a bunch of stills from the Vim period. It was very nice of him. I still have those. But he was reluctant about being interviewed for some reason. But so, after he died, I did interview Arlene, and she happily had a very, very sharp and retentive memory about the Vim days. I showed her Babe's Vim scrapbook, which is also in the new DVD, and she identified every person in every picture. And then I showed her two of the Plump and Runt Vim comedies, which I had on Super 8. And she said, "Oh, there I am. There's Millie Burstein. She was the switchboard operator. There's, she knew everybody in the film, which is a wonderful experience you only get when you talk to these people." So yeah, I was a fresh-faced kid. I think youth was an asset, being 17, 18, 19 years old. And I think a lot of these people were technicians who, are not famous anyway. They have their names in credits of the films, but nobody knows who they are really. And I think they were gratified that somebody was interested in what they had done 50 odd years earlier, you know. So, like I talked to Artie Quenzer, who was the lyric writer for Swiss Miss. And I subsequently found out that he'd been a member of the Irving Aronson Commanders, which is one of my favorite 1920s dance bands. So we talked about that too, as well as Laurel and Hardy. So, these people, I think they enjoyed having somebody take an interest in them. I was very timid, so it was a good thing that I had met most of these people before at Sons meetings, but there were several whom I found on my own. We didn't have the internet, so all I could do was just go to my library where they had every Los Angeles area phone book. And for example, Burt Jordan, I had no idea if he was still alive, what his story was. I wasn't smart enough to go to a film. I think there's ACE, which is the Film Editors Guild. I wasn't smart enough to think about looking for him there. So I just went through every LA area phone book and I found 5 Burt Jordans, believe it or not. So I wrote to every one of them, including a self-addressed stamped envelope for return. They all wrote me back. 4 of them said, "I'm not the Burt Jordan that you're looking for, but good luck and God bless you." The 5th one was a rather lengthy letter in this highly unusual script that he wrote in, but yes, I am the Burt Jordan that you seek. I am 92 years old and quite hard of hearing, but would be glad to talk with you.
Oh, lovely.
And if you will call, my wife will answer and we can set up a time, ... So that's how I found Burt Jordan. And as far as I know, I'm the only guy who ever interviewed him. I wasn't smart enough to look in my own Orange County phone book because I always figured they all lived in L.A. Turns out Richard Currier, the other Laurel and Hardy film editor, had been lurking in my Orange County phone book all this time, and it took Dick Bann to find it. Hey, Randy, do you know there's a Richard Currier in your phone book? What? Yeah, I called him, and he's the one. So Richard and I went down to see him. He lived about 30 miles south of me in a town which was then called El Toro, now called Lake Forest. We met him on his 88th birthday, August 26, 1980. And it was a great interview because he told us all about the procedure of editing the Laurel and Hardy pictures, who did what. And the main thing, though, I remember is he was a chain smoker at 88. He says, "My doctor thinks I should give these up." He asked me, "When did you start smoking?" I said, "When I was 8. He says, "Well, I guess they're not going to kill you now." And he was still smoking when he was 92. So anyway, yeah, I tried to do as much research as I could, still having to be busy with school in junior high school, and college. And I was a film major, so being a film major, that was a lot of lab work because I was always writing a script, making a film, or in the editing room all the time. When I wasn't also taking film history classes, and that's how I learned about the wider world of movies in college. So, tried to sandwich interviews in whenever I could. The other non-interview research I did primarily at the Margaret Herrick Library of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. That's the Oscar people. And in those days, they had a library on the 4th floor of their building on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. They were only open 4 days a week from 11 to 4, so kind of limited hours. And in those days, no computers, no nothing. All they had hard copy, big bound volumes of old trade papers going back to the teens, or maybe even earlier. But they had Variety, Hollywood Reporter, Film Daily, Hollywood Filmograph, Exhibitors Herald World, and a couple of others, and no indexes. So all I could do, I brought a cassette recorder. Sometimes I actually brought my big manual typewriter. I'm surprised they let me bring that in. But anyway, I brought some recording device, and I would just every day go through one of those trade papers looking for articles. And of course, I found lots of great articles about other people too. So I wrote down there's a Buster Keaton article here too. Make sure you copy where that is. So I have notes on that. I have yet to go back and retrieve all of those, but I know where they are. And that's how I did it, with file cards and cassette tapes and a manual typewriter from the 40s. Nothing high tech here. I would type up the articles on a file card and put them all in chronological order as I found them, so that that gradually told the story. So that's how, and then also I went to USC. Ned Comstock, who was just retired, and God only knows what the USC Film Library is going to do without him, because I think he's like Ambrose Wolfinger, the W.C. Fields character in Man of the Flying Trapeze. He's the only man who knows where everything is, and he got for me the Hal Roach payroll ledgers, which are of absolute key importance, because you can really, if you know how to crack the code on them, you can really extract a lot of information about the daily production of the films, or at least the weekly in that case. So I went through all of those, and I went through, they had all the Fox film scripts too at USC, which were, if you think the Fox films are bad, yeah, it tells you that there had to have been some measure of freedom given to Stan Laurel or somebody, because there is drastic difference between, for example, the script for The Dancing Masters and what they finally filmed. Even though that's not a great movie, it's still much better. If they had a producer saying, "You're going to stick to the script," you would have just screamed with what they were turning out.
Oh, that's really interesting to hear that. Yeah.
So those were at my own alma mater, Cal State Fullerton. It turned out that Fred Gill, who was the director of a lot of the early silents, had left his papers there. And so my own college, hooray, my own library had scripts for several of the Laurel and Hardy silent films. So I got copies of those. Then at the Hollywood 80 convention, which Bob Satterfield and Laurie Jones, the Way Out West, and the late Earl Kress, and all the great Way Out West people put together, that was a phenomenal avenue for research, because they brought together everybody they could find who still worked with Laurel and Hardy, and they all did panel discussions. And I put my mic right next to the real mic and got great audio on everybody telling their stories. So I have all of that. And so that was a tremendous source. And there was a dealer there in the dealer's room who had not only wonderful behind the scenes stills, but he had a whole pile of scripts. And I detail that story in the book I wrote of the Laurel and Hardy scripts. We didn't even know they had scripts in 1980. We kept hearing, "Oh, it was all off the cuff. The boys were great at improvising." And here I see this script. And it's clearly for Scram. And I went, "Oh, okay." And he wanted $35 a script, and he must have had 50 of them. And I was a starving college student, so I couldn't afford those. But I went to about a half dozen of my friends, and I said, "Look, these scripts are here. Let's each buy one, and then we'll Xerox what we have for each other, and we'll at least have those." Okay. And then after the convention, I went to the man who ran it. It was a store called Backlot Books on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. It was this little shed. It was only open on Saturdays. And I said, "I'm doing a research project. Can I somehow get copies of these scripts?" And he said, "I don't want you to photocopy them." I said, "How about if I dictate them into a tape recorder?" Okay. So for about 7 Saturdays in a row, I sat in the hot August sun on milk crates behind his store, dictating as fast as I could these scripts. And so that's how I got what I got. Finally, at one point, I said, "There's so many of these, I'm just going to have to dictate the things that are different about the scripts." So some of them I only have partially, unfortunately. If I'd had the money, I would have gotten them all. And $35 a script is a lot cheaper than what they go for today. And then the last chunk of the scripts that he had, his name was Douglas Hart. There was another guy who had a store called The Book Sale. John McLaughlin was his name, and he was nearby. He was in Orange County. He was an antique bookseller, and he had come across another collection of Laurel and Hardy scripts. Well, God smiled on me, because his collection perfectly complemented the ones that Doug Hart had at Backlot Books. So the one that John McLaughlin had were the ones that Doug didn't. And so between the two of them, I got to see and dictate almost all of the scripts. And oddly enough, about the only 3 that I haven't seen are Big Business, Two Tars, and The Music Box. 3 key films I would really love to see. So if anybody has those scripts, I would love to see them. But so that was another big chunk of the research. And being armed with all of that stuff, I said, well, okay, now the time is right to write a book about the history of the production of the films. And I was inspired to do that by Joe Adamson's book, Groucho, Harpo, Chico, and Sometimes Zeppo, which came out in 1973 when I was 14. And up to that point, movie books had been either fluffy biographies or scandalous biographies, or they were the films of so-and-so, which was very scant text outlining the storyline, maybe a couple of excerpts of reviews, and then a half a dozen pictures, and on to the next movie. And that's what there was. And nobody really seemed to be interested in telling the story yet of the actual production of the pictures. But Joe Adamson's book did that for the Marx Brothers. And I said, I can do that for Laurel and Hardy because I've got material now. And so I didn't know at first that I was going to write about every film individually, but it became obvious that that's the only way I could really do it. And so that's how and my friend Jordan Young, who I mentioned earlier, had his own publishing company and knew how to do the mechanics of making a book out of what I was writing. Again, it was not on computer yet. I was just typing up hard copy, and we found someone who had a Macintosh and who could do layout and design. She retyped all of it. She added 40 typos, but that's okay. And we had to be very judicious in choosing our photographs because photographs were $15 extra. You know, they had the text on a certain kind of film, and they had to cut in the photographs, and that was $15 a photo. So for as many photos as we had in the first edition of the book, I wanted to use more. Now, happily, it doesn't matter. Now, bits and bytes are bits and bytes. You can have as many photos as you want, which is why there are now 4 times as many photos in the book as there were originally. So, for your second question...
Well, you've already answered about 10 questions.
Good.
I got.
Thank God.
So you're very perceptive, Randy.
You
well
never
done.
Stop.
No, I mean, I was going to sort of ask you, because obviously you were a big inspiration to me, and I know to a lot of writers on Laurel and Hardy. So that was a question. Who was your inspiration? Who did you look up to? And obviously, the Joe Adamson book is a fabulous book.
Yeah, McCabe, Everson, also David Robinson, who wrote a book called The Great Funnies, which I got when I was 9.
Yeah.
And that taught me about comedians in Europe.
Right.
So, I didn't know about the fact that there was a Russian equivalent of John Bunny named Paksan, and there was an English comedian named Pimple. There were great photographs of all these European silent movie comedians. And I have to tell you that David Robinson and I have corresponded a little bit on the internet, and to have a nice blurb from him saying, monumental, it is an astoundingly exhaustive combination of the lives and creations and really the last word and a rewardingly long read. So to have that from David Robinson,
that's nice.
whose work I was reading when I was 9, that is just amazing to me. He also wrote a wonderful book about Buster Keaton too, and Chaplin, the ultimate Chaplin.
Yes,
book.
Yes, a brilliant book.
So he's a hero, as is Kevin Brownlow, the ultimate savior of silent film, both the actual film and the history of the film.
Yes,
I mean he is the guy. I wish I were as productive and had done as much as Kevin Brownlow has, but I did what I could at a time when I didn't have a lot of time to do it in. So
yeah, you did plenty, Randy. Don't worry about that.
We got what we could,
and the hard way as well. I mean, I sometimes pull
there wasn't any other way.
Yeah. I sometimes pull my face. Oh, I have to look through all these Lantern websites, and I've got to find. And that's such an easy thing to do nowadays. To look through the trade papers.
There's a search engine now. You type in Laurel and Hardy, and you immediately get 5,000 articles.
Yes,
I was happy at the end of the day driving to and from Beverly Hills every day, 35 miles each way. If I got a dozen little paragraph articles, that was a good day. And boy, now if I, but I'm glad I didn't wait. I'm glad I did it when I did, and I certainly knew that the people were more important than the paper. The paper would wait. That would be preserved somehow, the trade papers. But, the Joe Rock and Anita Garvin and Roy Seawright weren't going to be here forever. So get them now while you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're all gone now.
Yeah. And I was talking with, it was Glenn again, actually. Glenn Mitchell, we were talking about Viola Richard, one that got away, of course. It's nobody knew she was there.
No, or Dorothy Coburn.
Yeah.
I read an obituary for Dorothy Coburn, and she lived in Los Angeles, and why maybe she didn't want to be involved with Sons of the Desert or Way Out West or never heard of it or something. I don't know, but it's like, she was alive,
Yeah, what a shame.
And so there are a couple like that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I'm just interested, really, challenges. I mean, just how you've described, really, what you have to go through just to get a few articles and a few lines of text on Laurel and Hardy. What were the challenges associated with researching and writing a book about films that were, they're nearly 100 years old now, but however old they were at the time? What were the biggest challenges for you?
Well, just finding people and getting in touch with them, getting an interview, getting the time, praying that they weren't going to die before I got to see them. I had many restless nights, knowing, I haven't talked to Hal Roach yet, because he's 87 years old. I've got to talk to Hal Roach. We didn't know he was going to live to be 100.
Yeah.
But, and again, I was not the most outgoing kid, and so cold calling some of these people who were not members of Sons of the Desert was kind of daunting. But I never, outside of Billy Bletcher just being, reluctant to being interviewed, I never had anybody turn me down. And for example, I cold called Felix Knight, who was Tom Tom in Babes in Toyland.
Yeah.
He lived in New York. And of course, he had an illustrious career. He sang at the Metropolitan Opera. He was a well-known vocal coach and, was a pretty important guy. And well, gulp, here we go. And I said, hello, Mr. Knight. My name is Randy Skretvedt. I'm calling from Orange County, California. I'm doing a research project about Laurel and Hardy, and I was wondering if there might be some time when I could call you and we could talk about your work on Babes in Toyland. And he said, oh, I'm not doing anything now except watching a ball game.
Brilliant.
I said, okay. Well, happily, I had my questions already prepared and had them right there at the ready just in case that happened. And sure enough, it did. And he was a great interview. He talked to me for an hour and a half, so thank you up there.
And is that with a pad and a pen? That's no audio recordings of that, just a pad and a pen. Is that, Randy?
No, I have that on tape.
Oh, do you? Oh,
audio.
right. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yep.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I had a recorder that I had an audio recorder for cassette that would record phone calls. Yeah,
fantastic.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Yeah, we have that. And a phone interview with Anita Garvin is on the new the DVD. I did interviews with her in her home also, but there were times when I would do follow-ups on the phone, so I've got that.
I have to say that there's an Anita Garvin interview that you did, and it's on the new Blu-ray definitive. Such a captivating interview. I could have watched that forever. That's the one.
If you don't have it yet, that's the DVD.
That's the DVD.
It comes, and I made sure when we were starting production on this, I said make sure these are region free.
Yeah, well
because
done.
I said. As big as the market is in America, it's much bigger in England, and also you want to have it available for the Netherlands and Germany and everywhere else. So they are region free, and they will play. So anybody who's afraid that they won't or that they need a region free player, no, they'll play on your player. And I insisted on that.
That's a really interesting point, actually, and it's one of the things that has absolutely astounded me since I've been writing the Laurel and Hardy blog. I can see, which countries people are reading about Laurel and Hardy, or certainly reading, and there's a map of the world. And the countries get coloured in as somebody reads from that country, and the whole globe is literally reading about Laurel and Hardy. There's a little pocket in Africa, the centre of Africa, which is not reading about it. But literally,
we
everywhere.
have to send a care package to them immediately.
Yes,
and get
that's
them
right. Yeah, we'll
indoctrinated.
We'll drop it from an aeroplane as we fly across. Yeah. But it is just amazing. This Afghanistan, Iraq, just places you wouldn't even dream of it. I mean, fair enough, they may be expats, there may be, forces personnel, that kind of thing. But by the same token, China, Japan, Tanzania, just everywhere you could possibly think.
Great.
Is unbelievable.
That's wonderful.
And that's the beauty of, I guess, writing online, is that you can get that kind of data. You can see who's reading your stuff, where they are. Just the reach of Laurel and Hardy is just phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal.
It's also the beauty of comedy, which is primarily visual and physical.
Yeah.
And also comedy which touches on universal events of life and emotions.
Yes, absolutely.
And we have American comedians who are very topical and very witty, but they won't play anywhere else in the world except America, but Laurel and Hardy are universal because they don't do jokes; they do situations.
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So
yeah, and I also wondered if it's maybe it's part of the legacy of Hal Roach of his foreign market distribution and doing those foreign versions, because obviously the Hispanic community, the Spanish speaking languages, they're every and I guess to a certain extent there's that influence as well, which is endured. People have passed them down from generation to generation also. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm friends with several of the Italian Laurel and Hardy friends on my Facebook page. And as it turns out, there were 3 different teams of voice actors who dubbed the Laurel and Hardy films in Italian, and they became celebrities in their own right, just as the voice actors for Laurel and Hardy.
Oh, wow.
That's rather surprising to me, really.
But I guess that really ties into the fact that when we say that we love Laurel and Hardy and they are our friends, if these people are their voices, so of course you're going to be drawn to them. It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Isn't that swell?
The update of your book is dramatic, to say the least. It's probably the biggest expansion of anybody's book ever.
Oh.
What was behind that, Randy? Why did you suddenly think, right, I'm going to have to do this? Well, I'm going to do, and why so big?
Okay, well, as you know, the first edition, which was the orange cover version, came out in June. Yeah, oh, good, you've got yours. I don't have my of the first 2 with me. There you go.
Got it.
Is that an Apollo one, by the way? Does it say Apollo?
Yes, it does.
That was actually, I think, printed in the States, but that was the one British edition of it. The Americans ones say Moonstone Press, which was Jordan Young's one-man company. Anyway, that came out. The official release date was June 16th, 1987.
Yeah.
And we did 5,000 paperbacks and 1,000 hardcovers, which sold out almost immediately. Thank you. So then we did a second edition, slightly different paper stock, which is how I can tell the difference. So that was in 1988, and we also did another 5,000 and another 1,000 hardcovers, and those sold rather quickly. 1992, I did an update. We couldn't do any update within the actual body of the book as it was for technical reasons, but I could do appendices. So by that point, they had found some of the Spanish language pictures. Those were not known to exist when my first edition of the book came out, which is why the only thing that was known to exist on the foreign pictures at that point was Richard Bann had a 16 millimeter print of Le Caratier, which is the combination of Be Big and Laughing Gravy in French. And he showed that at the Hollywood 80 convention. And as far as we knew, that's all that survived of any of the foreign language pictures. Well, around 1985-86, the new Hal Roach Studios came into being with their colorizing of the films and, some bad things, some good things. But one of the good things was they started poking around the archive, the vaults, and I forget the name of the young man now, Lipson or something was his name. Anyway, he was having lunch with Richard Bann, and he said, "Oh, I found these cans of film marked Laurel and Hardy Spanish." And Richard said, let's look at those to make sure that they're not dubbed, and maybe that might be something. Well, turns out they had beautiful 35 millimeter because they had not been printed to death like everything else.
Yes, of course.
So they had Noche de Duendes, they had, which is Murder Case. They had complete Pardon Us, De Bote en Bote.
Yeah.
Several of them, especially Politicarius, which if you've ever seen, you will never forget.
Yes.
With good old Haji Ali and his Regurgitation Act.
That's bizarre.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, that was wonderful. So UCLA, because the preprint on that, because the source material was in such great condition, they could do a restoration on new prints very quickly. They didn't have to do a lot of repair work on those. So not too long after that, I got to see them all at UCLA. And so, wrote chapters about them too. So we added that as an appendix. I had one that turned out to be incorrect about the shooting dates for Lucky Dog. I was trying to piece together when Lucky Dog was made. We knew it was, everybody had said 1917. And I said, no, it can't be, because they have post-war jokes about the war debt, the Red Scare, and Prohibition. And so I thought, well, it could be 1919, because I had, thanks to a guy named Jim Kirchhoff, he had printed Stan Laurel's vaudeville schedule from old Billboard magazines. And so you could tell what theater and what town Stan Laurel was appearing in for about a 5-year period. And I noticed there was a 2-week window in 1919 when he was in Los Angeles, which was longer. He was only usually at any one place for a half week or a week. But here he was 2 weeks in 1919. And it was at a time when Babe was working for Vitagraph and Jess Robbins was working with him. And I thought, that must be the time. Well, turns out that wasn't the time. It was later. It was in February 1921. But that was another appendix in the Blue Book. So that came out in 92, and that sold out. So we did another printing in 96 with some updated things in the sources. And that was it for many years. And people kept saying, oh, it's the ultimate Laurel and Hardy book. Well, as years went by, I knew that it wasn't, because, for one thing, the cast listings were very skimpy on purpose, because at that point, the big McCabe-Kilgore-Bann book, the big coffee table book, we always called it, that had Richard Bann's detailed listing of all the people who were in the films, and I didn't want to plagiarize that.
Yeah.
Well, by the year 2005, 2006, I had finished teaching film, and I said, I want to do a new version of the Laurel and Hardy book, because there's so much more material thanks to the internet. So much more material was becoming so much more easily available. And, for example, Pete Schroeders and Richard Finnegan jointly gave me the music cue sheets. People were always asking about the music and the locations. People wanted more and more information about that. Well, of course, Bob Satterfield found a lot of the locations just by driving around Culver City with stills and saying, oh, there's a house. Well, now we had Ancestry.com, and that helped us find houses and addresses and all sorts of things. So I had all these new research resources at my disposal. And I said, well, now's that I got to rewrite this from the ground up, really, because there's just so much more material, and I don't have to drive to Beverly Hills every day now to go find it. Now it comes to me. So I didn't anticipate that was going to take another 7 or 8 years, but it did.
Wow.
But I said, let's throw in everything, including the kitchen sink. So everything that I had is in there. Yeah. I do have other photographs, which we didn't use, but we had to get it in under 630 pages, because that's the maximum that Amazon can print on a paperback. And my friend Dave Koenig, whom I've known since he was 14 and I was 18, he runs a trade magazine, and he does layout and design, and he's written several books that are about Disney, aspects of Walt Disney. And so he knew how to do layout and design and do all of this, and he said, I'll publish it. So I've had 2 great one-man publishing companies, Jordan Young's Moonstone Press, or Pastimes Publishing, which he renamed after we did a magazine together for 10 years, and then David Koenig with his Bonaventure Press. So thank goodness I met those 2 people in Sons of the Desert meetings, because they turned my jottings into beautiful books. But the reason that I updated it so drastically was just there was so much more material, and there were a lot of things that didn't get into the first edition that I had wanted, and I thought, well, now we got the room for it. Now we didn't have to worry about a limitation on how many pictures we could have. You could have as many as you wanted, so bring them on. And about half the photos in the book I have on actual physical prints, and the other half are just scans from the internet. And happily, somebody taught me how to take a low-resolution scan and fix it so that it looks like a high-resolution photo.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
I have a lot of things that are 72 DPI, and I turn them into 600 DPI. And
yeah, that's amazing.
Tweaked every one of those photos. I've spent an hour or two tweaking and playing with them to make them look better,
Yeah, well, they look absolutely beautiful. I mean, I bought the hardback, the limited edition, and I've also got the paperback as well, just as reference. Reference one to flick through.
I wish the printing were a little better in the paperback, but I can't do anything about that, because Amazon does everything. They print it and they send you a check. It's the only way that I can get the book distributed around the world at a decent cost, because postage is ridiculous from the States to Europe. I had some people buy hardcovers, but it cost them $80 in postage, and the book was $80. I'm sorry that it cost that much, but that's.
I mean, to be honest, when I bought the hardback book, and I think it cost me £80 to buy that, and I thought, wow, that's. But I've got to have it. I've got to have this, because I'll never forgive myself if I don't. Because I knew it was a limited run of about 1,000. Was it 1,000 copies or something?
2,000.
2,000.
2,000. Yeah.
And Amazon delivered it, and the delivery driver left it out in the rain overnight in the cardboard box. I thought, oh my God! I opened it up, and fortunately, it was fine.
Good.
So, but just it's such a beautiful book. The feel of the pages, the glossy. It's just a gorgeous thing. It is certainly worth the money.
That's due to Dave Koenig. So I thank him, and you can thank him, because he would send me 40 pages laid out every 3 days, and I'd say, "How are you doing this so quickly?" I thought I was going to have to do the layout, and I thought, it's going to take me forever to do this. And if I had done it, I'd still be laying it out.
Yeah,
But he would every 3 days. Here's another 40 pages, and I just go, this is astonishing. I mean, not only was he doing it so quickly, but they're gorgeous. And I'm so thrilled with what he did. And he made the book. I did research and writing and found stills, but he made the book.
Yes, yeah, and also just to give this little orange one a bit of credit. This was always my favourite Laurel and Hardy book, and I remember even just the quality of the paper is quite unusual, but I love it. And the smell of the book I love, because I'm a bit of a book nerd. And I bought this. I didn't know about it. I found it on a bookshelf just by chance in the local bookshop, and I was going on holiday to the States. I was going to Florida with my friend's family, and I took it with me, and I read it on the plane, and just by the pool, and it was just I thought, this is the book I've been waiting for, because it
was the book I was waiting for. Yeah. That's why I had to write it. No one else was doing it.
But it's just it's because it goes in chronological order. As they filmed them, and which is exactly, it just speaks to the kind of OCD nature, I guess, of wanting it in that strict order, and it's perfect.
Well, I think a lot of people were always confused about that. It's like, why do they go from silent to sound to silent to sound? And how come they went from Path A to MGM and back to Path A? Well, they didn't. It's just the strange order of release, which had little to do with the order of production. And for example, a film like Angora Love was shot in March of 1929, but didn't get released until mid-December of 1929. In fact, it's the last silent film released by MGM, and might be the last silent film released by any major studio.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Angora Love, because it's long after MGM's last silent feature.
Right.
So it could well be the last of the silents.
That's interesting.
With the exception of some very low budget westerns, which were made in 1930. But anyway, I'm still very proud of the original edition of the book, and of course, when I saw the first copies of that was another wonderful moment. After all those years, really working in earnest on the book from about 1979 through 86. And of course, I was working at Knott's Berry Farm and going to college and making movies in college and all that stuff too. But, using whatever time I had left to finish the book. And so I'm very grateful to Jordan Young for making that book a reality. And, we got a nice review in the New York Times. That was heady stuff for being 27 years old,
I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine.
Kirkus Reviews and Publishers Weekly gave it rave reviews, and it got a very good response. So, and at that point, some of the people whom I interviewed were still around. Not all of them. Marvin was gone, Richard Currier was gone, but Anita was still around, and Venice Lloyd, and Roy C. Wright, and so I sent them all copies of it. And I heard from Lois Laurel and Tony Hawes. She said, we have to buy another copy of your book because my mother keeps stealing ours. Big Lois, Stan's first wife, was living with them at the time in Tarzana.
Oh, lovely.
And she said she keeps taking ours, and she says she loves it because it reminds her of all of her old friends back in the old days.
Oh, how lovely.
And I said, well, that's very nice.
That is really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the key reason for me for writing the book, more so than just documenting the history of the production, was as much as I could to keep those people alive.
Yeah.
Because, they were the story. They were the people making those films, and they had the you are there experience to share about not only the physical experience of making the films, but also the emotional experience of it. And Roy Seawright tells this beautiful story about it could be rainy, drizzly, cold outside, but as soon as you stepped onto the Laurel and Hardy stage, it was warm.
Oh, that's really nice.
And it wasn't warm because of temperature. It was warm because of the human element.
Yes.
Because everybody was so committed toward making these wonderful, funny films and having such a great time doing it. And he said, you were grateful to be there.
That's really nice.
Even then you realized, this was something really, really special. And I had Richard Currier tell us, he said, the day he turned 88, he said, I still have dreams of being at the Hal Roach Studios with my gang around me. I have those dreams all the time. And he says, I would say that because of that, my inner soul, or whatever you want to call it, keeps bringing that back to me all the time, because that was such a special place in my life.
That's lovely, isn't it?
So you have, you don't get that in history books, and you don't get that from going through trade papers. You only get it from talking to people. So that's why I'm also particularly glad to have in the new, buy it now, the new release, I have some segments of some of the excerpts from some of the audio material, and also the 3 Super 8 interviews that I was able to do. There's lots more audio. There's a lot more where that came from. I have 30 hours alone on Lucille Hardy Price.
Wow.
Because I was asked by John McCabe to do interviews when he was doing his Babe book.
Right.
So I went to visit with Ben and Lucille multiple times and have cassettes on her all over the place. So have to get that preserved now. So
yeah, of course, yeah. But some great stuff to look forward to then. Hopefully,
I need a couple of full-time assistants.
Yeah, you do. You absolutely do. This is very true. Did you ever get a chance to interview Lois Senior?
Oh, Lois Senior. Well, I didn't really. She was living up in Santa Cruz for most of the time, which is quite a bit north of me. But then, as she was getting older, she did come to live with Tony and Lois. No, I never did meet Big Lois. I met Ruth.
Yeah.
I never met Ida either, because she was not in good health. I talked to a guy who was her caretaker. And he said, well, she's not doing too well, but, she's still alert, but not somebody you could interview. But I never even really did a proper interview with little Lois, because she was working on her own book at the time, which of course never happened. That has prevented a lot of film research from being done, as well, I'm working on my own book, and then it never happens. So you don't get the interview and you don't get the book.
Yeah.
That didn't really happen to me. That happened a lot for Jordan Young when he was interviewing character actors. Well, you'll find that story in my book. Well, where is the book?
Yeah, brilliant. Oh, what a shame. Yeah. What a shame.
But, I did send out, I should send a copy to you if you don't have it. When we came out with the big hardcover, as one of the bonus thank yous to people who funded it before we got it printed, I made a little PDF file of just personal reminiscences of some of the people that I interviewed.
I think is it Laurel and Hardy and Friends? Or you sent me that. I do have that. Yeah, that's lovely. That's really nice. Well,
if anybody could possibly care after all my blathering here, if they want to hear more about my life and interviewing these people, there's a lot more there. But talking to Hal Roach was particularly daunting. I
was going to ask that actually, Randy. I mean, because that is just something that obviously I'm in the middle of England, merry old England, and miles and miles and miles away from Hollywood. You were obviously Johnny on the spot there.
You're lucky.
So how was that to actually meet Hal Roach and to actually meet Anita Garfield? How did you feel at that time? Because obviously you're a young chap, as you say at the time, and what was it like? How did that feel?
Well, I was especially grateful to meet Anita Garvin, because even before any of us knew where she was, because nobody knew where she was until Finally, Bob Satterfield located her. Bob Satterfield was running the Way Out West tent in Los Angeles, and he located a lot of the Laurel and Hardy people. So my fez is off to him for finding a lot of the people that I interviewed. I didn't find the majority of them were already Way Out West connected, but he found her somehow, and he invited her to a Way Out West banquet, and he said, and her name was Anita Garvin Stanley, and he said, and if there is a Mr. Stanley, he is invited too. Well, Anita was very gratified to hear that, so she came down to this event, and that's how we knew where they were. She lived in a town called Camarillo, which is maybe 90 miles north of where I am. So Jordan Young wanted to write an article about her for the Los Angeles Times, and they said, okay, go for it. You got the assignment. So he and I went up to Camarillo and got to meet her. Her husband, Red Stanley, was still with us at the time. I really wish I had done a sit-down interview with him, because he was a key member of, once again, the Irving Aronson Commanders, the same band that Art Quinzer had been a member of, one of my very favorite dance bands. And I am still in the midst of writing booklet notes for a 4-CD project of all of that band's records. So that's another thing I write about, is old music. So I wish I had done a sit-down interview with Red, because he was one of the key members of that band. But we didn't know he was going to die within a year. We didn't know Anita was going to be with us through 1994. So, and no one had interviewed Anita. So, you have to have priorities. And she was wonderful. She was terrific. I still have snapshots that I took that day, instantly recognizable as Anita Garvin. The only thing that had changed really was her hair was white, and she was always my favorite of the supporting players, even as a kid, because she was the one who underplayed.
Yes.
Everybody else was very theatrical, like Charles Middleton, or explosive, like Finlayson, or even sort of even internally explosive, like Edgar Kennedy, who's trying to keep everything in.
Yeah, that's right.
She was the one who could get a huge laugh, like just by doing that.
Yeah.
With a glance.
Yes.
And I asked her about that, and she said, "Well, nobody ever directed me about that." She said, "I just figured that if you're in a long shot, where you're seeing full figure everybody, you play it a little more broadly. If it's a closer shot, then you play it less broadly. And if it's a close-up, all you have to do is think it."
Yeah.
And I said, yes, but so few actors of that time got that. I think you and Gary Cooper were the two who understood that if you just think something, it registers. So anyway, she had always been my favorite. So to meet her was a particular joy. And of course, to become friends with her and to know her for 15 years was wonderful. Later on, she lived at the Motion Picture Country Home, which, you could get a crash course in the history of movies at that time, just by one visit there and talking to people.
Yeah, I bet.
I had a film professor who, when I was in my senior year, he said, "Well, Brandy, you got to go get your master's." And he says, "You got to go to the University of Wisconsin at Madison and go get your 2-year Master of Fine Arts degree." And I said, "Larry, the history of the movie business in the 20s and 30s is not in Madison, Wisconsin. It's 25 miles up the 101 freeway in Studio City and Woodland Hills and Encino, and that's where all the old movie people live." This is 1982. I said, "I will get more of an education about old movies in one day at the Motion Picture Home than I will in 2 years in Wisconsin." So he said, "Oh." So I never did get a master's, but I got interviews with people who would have been dead in 2 years, you see. So, but my favorite is, I was going to say my story about Anita is we were having lunch with her at the Motion Picture Home, and she's in the middle of some great anecdote about something, and a waitress happened to drop some dishes with a very noisy crash, and Anita says, "Wait for your laugh, honey," and goes right back into her story. And I thought, only a slapstick comedian
Yes, yeah,
would have the reflex of saying, "Wait for your laugh, honey," before going into. But she was very witty and very funny. So
brilliant.
Every one of those people, when I read the Laurel and Hardy book and I read the quotes, I hear the voices of those people because I remember where I was when they told me those stories. And nobody else has that experience, which is why I wanted to also make the CD that people got with the hardcover, all of which, by the way, is now in the new Blu-ray and DVD. So those segments have but I wanted people to hear those voices.
It's lovely. Yeah.
They're all great voices too, just as voices.
Yeah.
So,
No, it's a really lovely link to those people. Let's just say for people like me, who are nowhere near Hollywood. Just fantastic. And what about Mr. Roach? What was he like?
Mr. Roach, him again, yes. Well, I sent him and everybody else one year when I was young and energetic. I sent him a Christmas card, a personalized Christmas card, and a Laurel Hardy Christmas card, and. His wife, Lucille Prynne Roach, wrote me back, and she said, Mr. Roach very much liked your Christmas card, and if you would like to talk with him, call me and we'll set up a time. So that broke the ice, because I had seen him. He had come to some Sons of the Desert Way Out West banquets, and I had also seen him at a Q&A that was being hosted at a silent movie event, but, really did not have a lot of contact with him. And he was still a very busy man at 88 years old,
Yeah.
So anyway, that broke the ice, and so Jordan Young and I, once again, we went up in January of 1981. It was just after he had turned 89 years old. He lived right near UCLA, and when we came there, we knew that we had 1 hour. The way that he structured things was we had one precious hour, and that was going to be it. Okay,
right.
He was still an executive, and so as we're waiting to go into his study, a college kid came out with a little cassette recorder and a bunch of notes under his arm. And so we go out and we come in, and the first thing Mr. Roach says, you have exactly 1 hour. So, okay. So I had already trying to prepare and make the best use of what I knew was only going to be an hour. I had gone through every interview I could find with Hal Roach that already answered certain questions so that I didn't ask what was already available. So all of my questions were sort of out of left field.
Okay.
The first thing I asked him was, I know that Stan Laurel's first films for you in 1918 were 5 one-reelers to finish off the series that Toto couldn't finish.
Yeah.
Why couldn't Toto finish those pictures?
Yeah.
And his face brightened because he knew that I wasn't going to ask him, how did Laurel and Hardy get together? Or, how did you find the Our Gang kids?
Yeah.
Which I'm sure he was asked endlessly.
Yeah, of course.
So his face brightened, and still being very physically dynamic at 88, he bolted from his chair, and he went over to the wall, and he picked off a framed photo. And he goes, here, this is Toto, here, right here. And he told me the story of Armando Nobello, this Italian clown, and he said, it was a very, very funny thing. Hal Roach sounded like this. He says, every time the camera started grinding, Toto got this nervous thing where his eyes would bug around like that, you know what I mean? And clearly, we couldn't make pictures like that. That was a hell of a thing, so we had to find somebody else. So, and as it turned out, I had already seen, at USC, I had seen the telegram that Alf Goulding, who was a director at Roach's, had sent to Stan Laurel, care of a theater in Santa Barbara. Alf Goulding had seen Stan at a theater in Los Angeles. Stan's vaudeville tour had since taken him up north to Santa Barbara, the next leg of the tour. And the telegram is, would you be interested in coming down and making a test for Roland Film Company for possible picture work? And I said, this piece of paper is the beginning of the Hal Roach Stan Laurel Association. Wow. I wish I had a photocopy of that, but I did copy down the precise wording and placing of it. So that text at least is in the book.
Yeah, brilliant. That's history.
So anyway, talking to Hal Roach was like talking to God, because it's like, okay, you created everything. Let me see what and I mean, I could have spent weeks with the man, and happily Richard Band did. We're still waiting for him to write his ultimate book about Hal Roach, which he should. I think he has all these things on tape, and there are times when Richard will write a given article and will quote from them. So goodness only knows what kind of an archive he has. He's rather secretive about some things. So I don't know, but and then Mr. Roach enjoyed our time together because I wasn't asking him the same questions. And so we got together again the next month. So I got 2 solid hours with him in his study. And then that was supplemented with, he used to come down to Huntington Beach in Orange County. He was friends with a young lady who was an English teacher at a high school, Edison High School in Huntington Beach. And every year for at least 3 years, on the last day of school, he would come to the film class. They had a film studies class in this high school.
Right.
And he would come and talk to the kids. And so I found out about this, and I called the young lady teacher, and I said, I'm doing this project, may I sit in? And she very nicely let me sit in and even ask a couple of questions. So I have that on tape as well. And
great.
And the kids did ask some rather provocative questions. There was one kid who says, Mr. Roach, we always hear about the casting couch with people who are movie moguls, studio heads, and producers, and how they take advantage of these young starlets who are so eager to break into movies by having their way with them. And he said, you had people like Thelma Todd and Jean Harlow and Lupe Velez. He says, did you ever engage in any of that sort of activity? And Mr. Roach says, oh, I don't think I did that more than 3,000 or 4,000 times. Which Brilliant. I'm sure is a tremendous exaggeration, but you see, he was always going for the laugh, which is why we have, the story about the big business wrong house and a couple of other things that not quite exactly what happened when you go find the paper trail. Hal Roach had been on the Les Crane show. Les Crane had a talk show in the 60s.
That's right.
And Roach told that story, and someone had written to him about it, and Stan said, no, it was absolutely not true. He said the guy who owned the house worked at the studio and was there with us. And that actually is the truth, because it was William Terhune's rental property. That's why they could use it. Nobody was living in the house at the time, which is also why I didn't find it in the 1930 census page where it should have been.
Right.
I was trying to find, who did live there? But there was nobody listed. All the other houses around it were there, but not that one. I thought, it's not there because there's nobody in the house. And you don't take a census of the house, you take a census of the people in the house. Well, where is William Terhune living now? He's on North Ardmore Street in downtown LA living with his mother. Okay. So this is a rental property for him. Okie dokie. And then in 1932, he got married, and then he and his wife did move in to the house on Dunleer. And in fact, he died in that house. He had a heart condition, and he was only, I think, 40 years old, William Terhune, when he died. And he died in the big business house. The lady who owns it now, happily, is very cordial and knows about the history of the house, and evidently has a big picture from the film over her fireplace. So she's well aware of the history of it, and so good for her. And she doesn't mind the occasional busload of people wearing hats like this, all taking pictures on her front lawn. So
yes, that must happen a lot. Fantastic, brilliant. Oh no. What I just wanted to ask before we move on to looking at today's first film in focus.
Yes, we haven't gotten to the films yet. This is all backstory.
No, this is too good. It's
and I have stuff on the films, I'm sorry to tell you. So
I'm glad to hear it. No, what I just one, and this is such a difficult question sometimes to put succinctly. Actually, is about what is it about Laurel and Hardy that makes them so special to you, and why do you think that their popularity has endured for so long?
Well, I thought about that, and my pithy, succinct answer is, we don't just laugh at Laurel and Hardy, we love them. Other comedians, the Marx Brothers, you laugh at them. Martin and Lewis, the Three Stooges, they're very funny, but you don't feel the depth, at least I don't feel the depth of affection that you do for Laurel and Hardy. I mean, Jerry Lewis, and I'm not a particular Jerry Lewis fan, but he did say, when I was a child, I saw them and I immediately knew they were my friends. Yeah. Not just they were funny, but they were my friends. And I think Dick Van Dyke has said the same thing. And I too, I had that innate reaction to them. When you're a little kid, I think you identify more with Stan than you do with Ollie. As you get older, things shift and you begin to empathize so much more with Ollie. The thing is, they complement each other so well. There is such, even in Duck Soup, which is really the first time that or even in Lucky Dog. Yeah. If you see, they have two good scenes together in Lucky Dog. Yeah. And there you can see just the physical, how they work together with props and how the reaction works. One knows when to look away and when to look back. They had it. They had their timing complemented each other. They had a rapport right from the get-go, because Lucky Dog, that opening scene, that's probably the day they met.
Yeah.
On Keith and Barbie streets in Los Angeles. The intersection's still there. But anyway, my short answer, which I never give, is we don't just laugh at Laurel and Hardy. We love Laurel and Hardy, and we love Laurel and Hardy because they love each other so much.
Yeah.
And that's something you don't find in other comedy teams. There is, in the Three Stooges, there's a sort of one for all for one. Come on, fellas, let's do this. But you see real affection between Laurel and Hardy. And my favorite scene of all in Laurel and Hardy is the reunion at the Soldiers' Home in Blockheads.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that's the most blatant statement of, I love you. And the funny thing is, it's all small talk, but the undercurrent is, I've missed you for 20 years. And Ollie actually says, now that I found you, I'm never letting you out of my sight again. Well, I'm tearing up just thinking about it. Where do you find that? And so that's what makes them special is, and Stan always said, Keaton and Lloyd and Chaplin made these big expensive pictures and we made the little cheap ones. And he says, and here people seem to be watching our little cheap ones more than they do those big expensive pictures. I guess people see how much love we put into them.
Yeah,
and that's right. Exactly it. That's exactly the key element is the affection. In fact, when you ask me about my desert island films, I'll go into that a little bit further.
Okay, that sounds good. Good. And I guess,
there's a teaser for you.
Yeah, if we needed a carrot, which we don't, we're with you all the way on this one. But as just going back to that, the warmth of it, and the love that they put into it, and they called it the lot of fun. And you were talking about, the affection that all the cast and crew had just being on set there. And what really amazes me, and I find this just astonishing, and it's only when you really start to read the background stories of the boys and their private lives, and you're thinking, God, these guys must have been in absolute personal turmoil, and they turn up on set and they just make the world laugh, and it's just, I just find that staggering, absolutely staggering.
I think that being on that stage in front of that camera was psychologically their relief from wives, lawsuits, tax bills, alimony, all the things that bedeviled them all through the key years of their career. I mean, it's funny, Sons of the Desert was shot basically the month of October 1933. Smack in the middle of that month, Lois Laurel divorces Stan, and because Stan just, I guess, I don't know why, but maybe he was feeling generous, but he made this agreement whereby Lois would get 50% of his earnings right off the top and pay her taxes. Well, that continued until he died. And she invested the money very well. She bought apartment buildings and invested in stocks that were very good, and she didn't need the money, but she was still taking it. So she saw a lot of Stan Laurel's, a lot more of his money than he ever saw. So that's right smack in the middle. That's October 13th of 33. And that's right in the middle of Sons of the Desert, one of their best movies.
Yeah.
Way Out West, probably the other great Laurel and Hardy feature, maybe even better than Sons of the Desert. At the time they were making that, each man was being sued by two women for alimony. 4 suits going on. Stan had Ruth suing for alimony and May Laurel coming back from Australia saying, we were married. I was his common-law wife, and I should have 12 years of alimony coming to me. And same thing with Babe. Babe was finally divorcing Myrtle after many, many years of having to contend with her extreme alcoholism. They'd been married for 16 years and had almost divorced in 1932. In fact, I have the property settlement record of a divorce which didn't happen. And finally, he just could not take it anymore. So that divorce was happening. At the same time, Madeline, his first wife, from 1913 to 1921, she had been in vaudeville as a piano player. That's how she and Babe met. And she made records. I have some of the records that she made for Brunswick in the 1920s as a piano player. And she worked in radio. But evidently the career was not going well by 1936. And she decided that she, too, would get a big chunk of all that money that Babe had. which he didn't have because he blew a lot of it at the racetrack. So that was another problem. So, yes, anyway, they had many stress-inducing problems.
Yeah.
All during the key years of their career. It's funny that the private lives sort of settled down during the Fox years. So it's like, what do you want? Do you want marital strife and great movies, or do you want lousy movies and a placid private life?
Yeah, they obviously needed that stress to keep them on the toes. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, couldn't have both at the same time for some reason.
No, bless them. Right, I think we better move on to a film, Randy. I think we need to focus down a little bit. I mean, I could talk to you forever, or listen to you forever. You've got such great stories. So we'll let Randy catch his breath for a moment, as it's now time for today's audio blog on the second 100 years. It was a two-reeler filmed June 11th to June 18th, 1927, and it was released on October the 8th, 1927, produced by Hal Roach, directed by Fred Gill. The main cast: Stan Laurel, Oliver Hardy, James Finlayson, Tiny Sanford, and Frank Brownlee. New starring team uncorks riotous performance in first picture as comedy duo, was the headline of the Roach Studios press sheet for Stan and Babe's 13th film in which they appeared together. Yes, finally, somebody at the studio had realised just how good the boys were together when they were actually together and not trying to kill each other. And the credit for this historic pairing goes to an Irishman named Leo McCarey. McCarey had worked his way up in the movie business, working initially for Mack Sennett, then at Universal Studios, before becoming a gag writer on the Our Gang series for Hal Roach. He was soon promoted to director for a series of comedies by another star at the Roach Studios, one Charlie Chase, whose real name was Charles Parrott. McCarey's development at Roach would eventually secured him the role of supervising director on all comedies at the studio, which of course included the Laurel and Hardy films. McCarey's influence on Laurel and Hardy's comedy style cannot be underestimated. His influence slowed the comedy pace down and brought a more humane touch, going against the frantic breakneck slapstick pace of previous early silent comedies, preferring instead a softer, more subtle form. As Simon Luvish expertly notes, McCarey's comedy is of pity, not cruelty. The second 100 Years was then the first official Laurel and Hardy comedy, and it was notably the first of the boys' films to be made with the guiding hand of Leo McCarey. It did appear, however, that the movie-going public had no idea that a pairing of the two was in the offing, as the trade paper Moving Picture World, July 2nd, 1927, reported. 4 units are hard at work on forthcoming Pathé comedies at the Hal Roach Studios. Vacation time is in the offing, and production is at high speed. Charlie Chase is finishing a carnival comedy under the direction of James Parrott. Robert McGowan is well started on a football story with the Our Gang. Clyde Bruckman is at work directing Max Davidson under the supervision of Leo McCarey. Fred Gill is launched on a convict story featuring the Hal Roach triple star combination, Stan Laurel, Oliver Hardy and James Finlayson. Further, the same publication on the 9th of July 1927 stated, Stan Laurel, Oliver Hardy and Jimmy Finlayson, Hal Roach's trio of star comedians, spent a day in jail the other day, but it was in the interests of fun-making for a new movie. It's interesting to note that even at this stage in their developing careers, they're still considered a trio of star comedians alongside Mr. Finlayson. And to be fair, you've got to say, why not? Finn always played consistently well in all his films, with very strong and recognisable character traits. He was always reliably funny, and so rightly deserved to be headlining the bill with our own dynamic duo. The triple header was not to last, however, as this would be the boys' pivotal breakaway movie, even though Finlayson was once again cast in a prominent role. In their first film together as a team, Stan and Ollie couldn't have looked more different, as they played 2 prison inmates, named Big Goofy and, wait for it, Little Goofy. As prisoners, they both have completely shaved heads and are dressed in typical striped jail uniforms. The characters are, however, for the most part at least, the Laurel and Hardy that the world would come to know and love. The opening scene is just lovely, and it sets the tone not only for the rest of the film, but for their on-screen relationship over the next 24 years. Sitting somewhat downhearted, Ollie helps himself to his last roll-up cigarette, kept under his hat. And seeing that Stan doesn't have one, he tears his in 2 and graciously shares it with his mate. They then quickly realise that neither of them has a match to light them with. Ollie beautifully flicks his half away and dejectedly stares into space with head in hands, while Stan takes his tobacco and snorts it, causing one almighty sneeze. Ollie's reaction to this unexpected outburst is comedy gold, laugh out loud funny. From there, the rest of the film moves along at a decent pace and contains some great sequences. The boys are determined to break out of the prison and have evidently been busy for some time digging a tunnel leading from underneath their cell. With some clever photography, we soon join them in the tunnel as they attempt to dig the last few feet to freedom. It starts badly, however, as Stan burns his own bottom with their candle and Ollie puts his pick through a water pipe, soaking them both. They decide to make a detour, which is, as Ollie explains, the wrong way to the right place. As Stan keeps his finger on the burst pipe, Ollie begins to tunnel upwards as the shot cuts away to the quietness of the warden's office. That is, quiet until two escaping inmates appear, chopping their way through the office floor right under the nose of the warden. With the escape attempt foiled, the boys are chased back to their cells and to their prison guard, played by a very animated Tiny Sanford. Meanwhile, their tunnel continues to fill up with water from the burst pipe and eventually floods the warden's office to the point where we see someone floating around in the room. After much effort, they finally escape from the prison by turning their uniforms inside out and pretending to be painters and decorators. They steal a couple of paint pots from the real decorators, who had just gone for a lunch break, and they magically and miraculously walk right out of the prison gates. They're immediately spotted and viewed with some suspicion by an officer on the beat, and he follows them all around the town. The boys, feeling very conspicuous, try to remain nonchalant and proceed to paint everything in sight, i.e. cars, windows, pavements, and even Dorothy Coburn's rear end. These are some very good gags, and according to Randy Skretvedt, were entirely improvised on the set. They eventually manage to give the officer the slip and jump into a waiting car. As the chauffeur-driven car pulls away, the boys throw the passengers out, relieving them of their clothes. The only problem is, and unbeknown to the boys, the previous occupants of the car were actually visiting French prison officials on their way to inspect the very prison the boys had just escaped from. And so, our heroes are delivered back to the prison, only this time they are in the top hat and tails guise of the expected French dignitaries. There follow some funny scenes of awkwardness as the two escaped prisoners attempt to fit in with the high society types. There's a lovely little moment where Stan trips up over the long flowing train of a lady's dress, and in annoyance he turns and kicks the dress. It's just a small detail, but it's very funny. For the next trial, they find themselves sitting around a large banqueting table, having a posh meal with the top brass from the prison, in particular the prison governor, James Finlayson, and a lady who we assume to be his wife. Stan's unfamiliarity with silver service and table etiquette quickly show through, and he ends up chasing a grape or a cherry round the table with a fork from off the top of his fruit cocktail. Onto and around his plate, along the table, and he ends up first dropping it down the back of Finn's wife's dress, and then, having retrieved it by hand, he then repeats the exercise, this time with a spoon, and then flirts the offending grape into Finlayson's eye. To me, this scene just never stops being funny, I think down to Stan's focused determination, but mostly due to the reactions of Finn. James Finlayson was an absolute master at reacting to the boys right from the get-go, and with one squinting look, he can have an audience in stitches. He was superb in his very first film with both Laurel and Hardy, Love 'Em and Weep, just as he was in every one of the 33 films they made together. As soon as the boys, in their guise as prison officials, were taken on a tour of the prison facilities, they're quickly recognised, especially as the two real French officials were inhabiting Stan and Ollie's old cell. The game was up. So, the Laurel and Hardy train was finally properly up and running and was about to hit top speed. It's very interesting to note that according to Randy Skretvedt's Magic Behind the Movies book, Stan was not initially keen on McCary's suggestion of becoming part of an official comedy team, for the main reason that he wanted to work primarily behind the scenes, writing and directing. Babe Hardy also was very nervous about the prospect of partnering with Stan, but having worked for many years on literally hundreds of films and always in the shadow of leading players such as Larry Semin or Harry Langdon, to name but two, here was his chance to become a leading star himself, even if it was part of a double act. Despite the studio promoting this picture as featuring their new starring team, it appeared to have passed many local theatre owners by, as quite a number of them promoted the second 100 years as a Stan Laurel comedy, completely ignoring Babe Hardy's significant role. This sort of a mission would very soon be a thing of the past, however, as the names Laurel and Hardy were soon to become inextricably linked, like fish and chips, or even possum and yam for that matter. Hal Roach and Leo McCarey knew they had something special on their hands in Stan and Babe, and a businessman like Roach was not about to let an opportunity like this slip through his grasp. From this point, the boys, together with Roach, McCarey, Finlayson and a host of other regulars, would go on to turn out hit comedy after hit comedy for many years to come. Their two reelers, usually as supporting items in theatres, became headline items and major draws for moviegoers. The films of Laurel and Hardy were marketed with the same amount of effort and budget as typically only afforded to major feature films. Laurel and Hardy were about to become two of the biggest stars not only in the world of comedy or in Hollywood, but around the globe. Over the years, directors and supporting actors would come and go, and even the studios responsible for making and distributing the boys' films changed hands. From this moment on, there would always be a reliable and unmistakable constant that fans could and would return to again and again, even long after their mortal passing. That constant was, of course, Mr. Hardy and his good friend, Mr. Laurel.
Merry Christmas, Mother. Merry Christmas, Ma. Hi, Mommy, and a hot cha-cha.
So, the second 100 years, we'll have a look at that. I think of it, and I think you think of it also, as the first film of the boys as an official team.
People are rolling their eyes now. He's got another story. Yes, indeed, I do. And here's the reason why. When I was a young lad, buying lots of stills, I would have to go to shops on Hollywood Boulevard. We didn't have the internet then to get scans of everything under the sun. We had to go buy physical prints of things. Back in those days, you could get original Laurel and Hardy stills for about $4, and they were plentiful. I used to go to the Larry Edmunds bookshop, which is still there on Hollywood Boulevard, and everybody should support it. And I'd say, "What do you have on Laurel and Hardy?" And he'd bring out 3 big Kodak photo paper boxes full of stills, and the vast majority of them were originals from the 30s and 40s, and you could have them for $3 or $4 a piece. Mostly scene stills, but I was always looking for the behind-the-scenes stills. As soon as I realized that such things existed, I said, well, I know what happens in the movies. I want to know what happens on the other side of the camera. So that's what I always emphasized. Anyway, one day, not at Larry Edmunds, I was walking down Hollywood Boulevard in search of other stills, and there was another little movie memorabilia shop called Artisan's Patio. And in the window, I saw this. It's a press sheet for the second 100 years. And, of course, my eye caught that, and it particularly caught new starring team uncorks riotous performance in first picture as comedy duo. And I said, that's history. Yikes. I have to have that. And happily, the person in the shop was only charging $35 for it. And even more astonishingly, I had $35 at the time. So I was able to buy it. I still have it here. It's lovely. We reproduced it, at least the first page in the book. The back page has all the lobby cards. And what else is in it? Is
that the original one there, Randy?
Yes, this is it from 1927.
Good grief!
Here it is. So 93.
That is pristine.
Years old.
That's
yes,
amazing.
It is. I'm trying to keep it that way, so I only haul it out on rare occasions. But anyway, it was just sitting in the shop window, and my guardian angels said, "Randy, over there." I cannot tell you how many times spooky things have happened where research things that turned out to be of key importance dropped into my lap that I would never have found. Somebody up there knows that I'm working on this and goes, "Oh yeah, he should have that. Let's make sure he sees that." So thanks, folks, everybody up there, all my dear departed friends. I'm trying to do my best to keep you all alive. So, do what we can. So anyway, it's a wonderful film. It really, there's Duck Soup, and then other films where, like Sailors Beware, where they're both in it and they both have a nice scene or two, but they're not Stan and Ollie. Then there's Do Detectives Think, and you would think at that point they'd go, now they've got it. But then they do Flying Elephants and Sugar Daddies, But right after Sugar Daddies, they did this one. And this really is, I think this is the moment when Leo McCarey went to Hal Roach and said, let's develop a series around Stan and Babe. And Roach said, okay, let's go for it. It's not the first official Laurel and Hardy comedy because that didn't happen until Should Married Men Go Home.
Yes.
And you see in the stills, they're still called the S series, which stands for All Stars.
Right.
And then starting with Should Married Men Go Home, it's L for Laurel.
Right.
So in the little code numbers in the bottom right corner of the stills. But I think this is the one where Leo McCarey said, let's really start to develop a series around them. And it's a very good comedy. There is a 16 millimeter print of it, ironically, floating around, which is from Robert Youngson's collection, as is the second reel of Battle of the Century, which we now have. And it's longer than the print that we usually see, and it has more footage. I say floating around because it has more footage of the warden floating around in his office underwater.
Right, yeah.
Because the print that I know, that's only in there for about 3 seconds, and I thought, wow, that's a lot of expense and time to, what did they shoot that in a tank? How did they do that for 3 seconds, But that doesn't surprise me with the Roach lot. I mean, they did everything they could for the sake of the film. It has some beautiful art direction. Once again, the sets and the costumes, it never looked like a low-budget studio, even though Roy Seawright always said, they always hit you over the head until you were black and blue, that we had no money. We have no money. Find the cheapest way ever. We have no money. But it never looks like no money. They look very handsome. You will see a thin Eugene Pellette, as the Frenchman at the dinner party. Also the wonderful Eleanor Vanderveer. I never got to meet her. Bob Satterfield was quite close to her, and because of him, I have an autographed photo from her. She always played well-to-do society ladies, which is funny because there was no wealth in her background at all.
Right.
She came from modest circumstances, and she married this man who was a lawyer, a crusading lawyer who did almost all of his work pro bono for free for underprivileged people, which meant that she never had any money either. Her family never had any money. She had a daughter named Barbara, and she finally said, I'm tired of this. She had a friend who was working in movies and said, come out here because you're a good type and you don't need to be an actress, just be a dress extra. Yeah. So she did, and I think from 1923 on, she's very active. She's in Casablanca, she's in Frankenstein, she's in a lot of key movies if you look for her. There's another lady named Bess Flowers who is the queen of the Hollywood extras. If you know what she looks like, she shows up in everything. Right. But Eleanor Vanderveer isn't far behind. She's, if you know what she looks like, and you just look for her anytime there are well-to-do people in a crowd in a movie, she's likely to be there.
Right.
So, but she's got a couple of good little scenes in this, and of course there's the fruit cocktail gag.
Yes. Later
amplified and made immortal by Anita Garvin in From Soup to Nuts.
Yeah.
But the first stage of it is here in Second 100 Years.
Yeah, I like this take on it though. I like the fact that Stan's chasing it all the way up the table. I think that's just it is just this in essence it's the same gag, but I don't know. I do like Stan's take on it. I like the way that it travels away and then.
Well, he could get away with that. Anita Garvin couldn't, obviously, because she was trying to keep her. Being nouveau riche, she was trying to do everything, try to find the right fork to use and see what everybody else is using. So she had to keep it cool, calm, and collected and still going, stupid cherry, And so internalizing, once again, underplaying and internalizing everything. I did want to mention, I don't think either one of the current DVD releases, the British or the American, has the actual main title. And cutting continuities and other things suggest that it actually was, despite that, it actually was the second 100 years on the title. So just a little trivial note for those who are worried about such things.
There are some lobby cards of exactly that, aren't they, as well, I've seen.
In the scripts book, I was able to get the full script for that. And somebody sent me, they were working in one of the vaults, and they found, I don't know if the print had the original main title, but it had an end of reel title card. which we never see, but they're on the original prints.
Right.
And he gave me a frame blow up of it, and I have that in the scripts book. And it says the second 100 years. So
yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So I think that is the official title for those of you who are manic about such things.
Yeah. In fact, I'm just looking at my screen now. Yeah, and there's 3 kind of sepia tone lobby cards with photographs on.
Yeah.
And then there's one sepia tone, and it looks illustrated almost.
And the lobby card, the title card says the second 100 years, but then the others spell it out as the second 100 years.
That's right. Yeah.
But again, there it's entirely different. So they weren't always consistent. There's a lot of misspellings of names of supporting actors in Hal Roach title cards. So
yeah, I find it quite interesting as well. I was looking through some of the old newspapers, not the trade papers, it's just sort of local American newspapers, and a lot of those are advertising it as a Stan Laurel comedy, even then, which I find is quite interesting. Yeah.
I was surprised to find that about the Path A pictures. I had assumed incorrectly in the first edition of my book that somebody at Path A said, "Oh, well, this Laurel and Hardy team is taking off. Let's carefully parcel out gradually what we have left so that we can take the fullest advantage of them."
Yeah.
Well, then you see the posters and the lobby cards for those last Path A pictures, and Hardy isn't even mentioned.
That's right, yeah.
Said, flying elephants with Stan Laurel, Jimmy Finlayson, and what's her name? Lamphere. She was
Faye Lamphere.
Yeah, she was a beauty contest winner, and she's in the movie for about 10 seconds.
Yeah, that's right.
No mention at all of Oliver Hardy.
No, yeah, that is weird.
So they missed the boat on that.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. You think they were cashing in on the success of the new team that's being built, but no.
Yeah, no, they were utterly unaware of it, which is probably one of many reasons why Hal Roach shifted distribution to MGM. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And one thing I like as well about the second 100 years, although it is, we label it as the first team film, there's still a lot of development happening as it goes along. I was just looking at this afternoon, and there's the nice bit where they share the cigarette at the start, that little little
match.
Bond, no match exactly. And also, what I noticed was like when they're in the lineup, in the as the prisoners, and Stan is the one that comes off worse than Ollie.
Oh.
And Stan's the one that's getting throttled by I think it's Tiny Sanford as the warden guard. Where I think usually, later on it would probably be the other way around. Stan would be getting Babe into trouble. So there's still trying to decide which one is the more funny one to get to be the butt of the joke. It's funny.
But again, that's the value of watching the films in sequential order as they were made, because you see things like that, and you see the first time Stan calls Ollie. In Perfect Day, and Ollie doesn't like it, but then I think the next time is in Murder Case.
Yeah.
And by that time, Ollie doesn't mind. And that's also the first time they use Another Nice Mess You've Gotten Me Into.
That's right, yes.
So it's fun to see them in order and watch as the trademarks are born and develop.
Yeah, and also in the silent films as well. I think it might be Habeas Corpus, and you can see Stan is shouting Ollie, but he's shouting Babe.
Hey, Babe.
Yeah.
And which he does in Big Business also.
Yeah.
When he thinks he sold a Christmas tree to Finlayson.
Yes, that's right.
He shouts out, he goes, "Hey, Babe," and you can see that's what he's saying.
That's right. Yeah. And also, is it Love 'Em and Weep? Finlayson's wife in the film, she calls him Jimmy. You can see Setnian's calling him Jimmy. Really, really nice, really nice. Mm-hmm. I think it's when he sort of faints. He pretends to faint to draw her out of the bathroom. Really interesting. I love these little bits that you just spot every now and again. It's fantastic. Yeah, fantastic.
Another thing that just happened, like I say, spooky things. I got a letter from someone I didn't know. And I don't know how he got my address or knew about me, and I never met this man, but he wrote and he said, "I understand you were doing research on Laurel and Hardy. I used to live for a time with Art and Venice Lloyd, and I believe Venice is still around. Her sister, Florence Jefferson, runs a dress shop in Los Angeles, and here is the address for the dress shop. You might want to contact Florence and see if you can talk to Venice." Sincerely yours, da, da, da. I never knew who this was or how he found out about me. This came out of the blue. So I go, okay. So I wrote a letter to Florence Jefferson explaining everything. I got a letter back from her saying, you got me just in time because I'm just retiring and closing up my dress shop, but I got this a day before I closed everything up. Yes, my sister Venice is fine. We live right next to each other. She would be happy to talk to you. Here is her phone number. Okay. So I call and, hello, this very cheery lady. And, I was expecting to find this very grandmotherly type when we made I'd love to talk to you about Artie and the boys,
Oh.
So, and turns out she was very glamorous. You can see pictures of her in the new DVD. Still had her dancer's figure, and she was rather heavily made up, but she was, for being in her late 70s, she was quite the knockout, But on one occasion, I brought over my Super 8 projector. She said, "Oh, I'm in the one where Stan's a Scotsman." She said, Artie and I were just courting at that time, and he thought he'd impress me by letting me have a little bit in the film.
Right.
So putting pants on Philip. Okay, so I brought it. We're sitting on the floor of her living room, watching this projected on the wall, and the scene comes when Sam Lufkin is checking Stan's head for lice. And she says, there I am, there. And she's right smack in the middle, way in the background, wearing a dark cloche hat. And she's laughing at all this. And I could immediately see, knowing now what she looked like. I said, of course that's who she is. And so, that's something I wouldn't have known unless I talked to Venice Lloyd. She also said, I did a little bit as a secretary. Well, that's in Chickens Come Home. There's a scene, hello, Mr. Hardy, or whatever the line is that they say. And so she's quite visible there, too.
And does she pile into the office as well? They all pile into the office, certainly when he sits on
Yeah, there's a whole line of them. It's Baldy and Alice Cook and Venice and Ham Kinsey and Clara Gill, Fred Gill's younger sister. When I watch these movies now, it's like my own home movies.
Oh, that's nice.
Because I know all these, even if I didn't meet those people, now I know their backgrounds, and so they do become like friends to you with that sort of. I just found Venice in a Charlie Chase short the other day that I hadn't seen before. So, I am not an expert on other Hal Roach movies. I know Laurel and Hardy and Our Gang very well, but the other series I'm still learning about. And the sad fact is a lot of them are not all that funny. Even Charlie Chase, when he's great, he's wonderful, but you go through three that are not so good to get to one that's great. So, Hal Roach was wonderful, but you needed another person to really guide a series to make it better than average. And he had that in Stan Laurel, and he had it in Bob McGowan for Our Gang. So,
Brilliant.
All right. Well, second 100 years.
Yes. Back to second 100 years, absolutely. So how do you think it rates, Randy, as one of their early?
Yeah, I think it's one of the best of that period. Yeah, absolutely. Some of them are a little bit of a chore, like Slipping Wives, which is, one of many Hal Roach comedies of the period that are basically farce comedies, and rather plot heavy. Second 100 Years, happily, doesn't have that much of a story. It has just enough, and also one thing that's good about Hal Roach comedies is usually, not always Charlie Chase, but usually they're good about establishing a premise and following it through and having a good finale, a good finish. Buster Keaton always used to say, once you get your initial idea, figure out what your end is, because the middle will take care of itself.
Right, yeah.
Which is such a sensible idea about plot construction, but so few people, you look at the Dancing Masters. Why do they have a dancing school when it doesn't figure in any other part of the movie after the first 10 minutes? Why didn't they use that at the end? Why didn't the girls in the dancing school have something to do with resolving the plot, Anyway, Laurel and Hardy and Hal Roach were good about resolving it, and Second 100 Years it's a good solid story. It's also nice to see some of the location work. There's that great shot of Otto Freeze and the other gentleman who I forget now, but they're the real Frenchmen, and they're in their long underwear jumping up and down. And that's taken at the intersection of Bagley Avenue and Venice Boulevard. And you see the two buildings in back of them. They're still there today. You can do a Google search for the Venice Boulevard and Bagley, and you'll see those two buildings in the back, and they're still there. So
is that the same? Is that the same junction? I think you were telling me about this the other day with the bacon grabbers. They drive around that corner.
Yes,
Is that the same?
Yes, and it's where the hats off headgear fight happens too.
Oh, right in the middle of the junction.
Yeah, Venice and Bagley in Culver City.
Right. Okay.
Bagley is a teeny tiny part of Main Street, which is also the shortest Main Street in America. But that's the one you see in Leave 'Em Laughing. It's kind of the part of Culver City that they used over and over again for Hal Roach silent comedies, when it was much easier to do location shooting, because if you have hand crank cameras that don't need electricity and you don't need to be hooked up to sound recording equipment, it's easy to just go out there and shoot it. They didn't do that so much in the talkie era.
Yeah, and is it still? I mean, I've never been to Culver City yet. It's something I'd love to do. I mean, it's a dream. But is it still? If you stand there, is it still obvious? Where that junction is and what's there?
Yes. Happily, Culver City is very aware of its historical past.
Great.
And so they have not, demolished or refaced or anything. They keep the top. I mean, obviously, it's all new tenants in those buildings, but if you look at the tops of the buildings, you can go, okay, yeah. I was there one time taking pictures of different buildings, and a guy from across the street goes, "Hey, you a Laurel and Hardy guy?" I go, yeah. He goes, "Come here." So he comes in and he says, "See the front of my building here? It's here." And he shows me a still from Angora Love, and it's the front of his shop, And he says, "See that tile there? That's there, right there." And he says, "I had some people here yesterday from Italy, and they were wondering about Laurel and Hardy locations, and I showed them this photo." And I said, "Do you get them all?" Every day. So the people in Culver City are aware of their heritage for Hal Roach Studios and MGM, of course, also. Even though MGM, I don't know if they did a lot of location shooting there on the street, but the Historical Society, I think, is quite proud of the fact that you can see those buildings today as they were in 1927. There is a guy online named Chris Bungo.
Oh, yes, yeah.
UNGO, who does these wonderful then and now films. Sometimes it's very sad that nothing exists of what was there 90 years ago, but many times it's quite surprising what is still there. So,
Oh, they're astonishing videos. How he matches those buildings up is amazing.
Yeah. Chris is terrific.
And I'm just trying to remember the prison location in Second Hundred Years. Those big gates.
Yes.
That is that some kind of hospital or something?
It was like the hospital or like a coroner's office or something now.
Yeah.
They were used in Second Hundred Years and Huskow also.
Yeah.
They use them. Because it said, what is it? The real sheriff's office or something. I have to go to my book to find the correct wording of it, but there is something that indicates that it was an actual location that was used in law enforcement.
Right. Yes. That's what I was thinking. And also, isn't the house reused in another film? The governor's house. You see the car drive up.
Yeah, I don't think that's the Millbank house, which is the one that you see in Wrong Again. But again, I should have gone back and read my own chapter to remember this.
I'm testing you out.
Well, Hal Roach was a member of just about every social organization known to man, and was very well connected with all sorts of well-to-do people in Los Angeles. And so, when an occasion like this arose where he needed to find a very well-appointed house for one of his comedies, he could call upon people whom he knew and would say, "Would you mind if we could come over for a day and just shoot an exterior shot of your house?" Sure, I mean, there's a very long story. When you get to Wrong Again, we can talk about the Millbank house, which has a wonderful several stories about that.
Brilliant.
But yeah, these were people that Hal Roach knew from the Uplifters Club or any number of other social organizations, and they were happy to.
Right.
And as I discovered going through Ancestry.com and going through census pages, that's how I found out that the Bacon Grabbers house was the brand new house just being moved into by Elmer Regas, the sound engineer. Late in 1928, when he was installing the sound recording equipment, he bought that house on Bannockburn in Cheviot Hills, right near the big business house.
Yeah.
And, son of a gun, that's the Edgar Kennedy house in Bacon Grabbers, So
Amazing.
you figure, hey, Elmer, you're not moved in yet. Your family's still in New York. They haven't come out yet to live with you. As long as you don't have the furniture in yet, can we do some interiors and some exteriors in your house for this film? Sure, boss, new boss. What are you going to say,
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was, as with Big Business being the house that belonged to film editor William Terhune, or the Perfect Day house belonged to a guy who was an electrician at the Roach Studios.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that,
just easier to use people who were already tuned into the mechanics of making comedy films than approaching a stranger going, "You're going to do what to my house? Who's going to be here? What?" Whereas if it's somebody from the studio, it's like, okay, we'll have a crew of 20 people here and we'll have, fine, just pay me a little extra for the use of the house and it's yours,
Brilliant.
'Twas Christmas Day in the poorhouse, and the boys were feeling blue. The boys in gray were fighting. A Merry Christmas to you.
And a Happy New Year to you.
And that brings us to the end of episode 9. Make sure to look out for the second part of our interview with Randy in episode 10, coming along in just a few weeks' time. To make sure you don't miss it, just hit the subscribe button on your favourite podcast provider's platform. I hope you've enjoyed this bumper special episode as much as I've enjoyed putting it together. Thanks as usual to the Bohunks Orchestra and to our special guest Randy Skretvedt. And of course, thank you to you for spending this time with me again. Don't forget you can become a member of our Bloghead community by joining the Blogheads Facebook group. Links to the group can be found in the show notes as usual. Also in the show notes, you can also find all the relevant affiliate links to purchase copies of Randy's wonderful book, The Magic Behind the Movies, copies of the Bohunks CDs, and also the links to the Second 100 Years blog, and much more besides. So here's to a much happier and prosperous new year. Stay safe, keep laughing, and as usual, it's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
And it's a very goodbye from me. Goodbye.